Welcome to On the Bauble Podcast, episode 54. I'm your host, Tsubasa J. Ueda, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today we're going to be doing a fundamentals episode on how to approach a new limited set in Flesh and Blood. And hopefully this episode will bring value to both new players and experienced players alike, and talk about our approach on coming into a new set. So this next set's going to be heavy hitters, but we're going to be referencing a lot of the older sets. But before that, how was your week, Yuki?
My week's been pretty good. I haven't been playing a whole lot of Flesh and Blood, to be honest. I've mostly just been relaxing. I've been playing a lot of Vintage Cube and Magic lately at a friend's place. That's been kind of fun. It's amazing how when you don't play a game for a while, the game gets pretty hard. Like, there's so many new cards in Magic, and I just have no idea what a lot of them do, and I just lose all the time because of it. But it's still fun. It's a lot of fun. I always love cubing. Fab Cube or Magic Cube. So that's mostly what I've been up to, but I'm really excited for heavy hitters and to kind of get focused back on Flesh and Blood soon. I feel like it's about time and I'm feeling ready, but having the break is always nice. How about you?
I ended up just playing one draft last week or yesterday. It was a WTR draft. One of the guys had a box of WTR lying around. He brought it our LGS, and then the LGS let us draft the WTR instead of the Bright Lights. And
was this for Armory?
Yeah, it was for Armory. So
that's sweet.
So we got the Armory pricing. It was just draft. Basically, they just replaced the packs they were going to use for the Armory, and we replaced it with WTR. Yeah, one of the guys opened a Heart of Iandel, so it was an amazing box.
Wow, that's pretty insane. That's very cool, though. Yeah, I love WTR Limited. It's kind of hard to play these days, at least in Canada. Maybe other places have more access to product, but it is a great set. And if you've never drafted or played sealed with WTR and you're looking for something to do that's just like kind of fun, I'd recommend giving it a shot. It's a pretty sweet format.
And I realize now, because there was a couple of people at the Armory that never drafted WTR before. Dory is like not fair against new players. Like,
yeah,
man, I don't understand how anyone can beat Dory if it was their first time like playing against it.
Yeah, it's definitely pretty rough. She has this effect even in constructed, but like if your opponent doesn't know what you're trying to do or isn't familiar enough with like all the options and how to play around it, all their reactions just make it so tricky and so many ways to kind of get got. And then she snowballs with the +1 counter if mistakes are made. So you can kind of just like make a mistake and then she has a counter and then you can't catch up and then she gets more counters and then the game's over pretty easily. So just be afraid. Just be not afraid. Be cautious of Dory. Think about what she can do. Lots of +3s. That's the biggest trick, I think, is basically everything is a +3. The only 0 cost is Iron Song response. Most of them cost 1. So you can kind of make some informed choices about how much they're likely to be able to pump, etc.
Yeah, I had Overpowered. I had 3 Overpowereds in my deck. Yeah, they overblocked for 3 more, and I'm just like, Overpower. And they're like, oh, I lose.
Yeah, Overpower, very good. Are you uploading your draft deck?
Yeah, I will be posting my draft deck, just like a little write-up on the Discord channel that we made for our Patreon. Do you want to talk about the Patreon real quick?
Yeah, so last week we just talked about how we're starting a Patreon to help us just pay for editing software and all that kind of stuff, help fund the podcast and the work that we put into it. If you are able, or if you're thinking about maybe supporting or giving back to the show, we really appreciate it. You can find it at patreon.com/onthebauble. The link will be in the show notes or in the description. But if you can do that, subscriptions start at as little as $2 a month, so very cheap, less than the price of a cup of coffee. And also, if you can't give back, don't feel bad either. Just having you here, listening, talking about the podcast with your friends means a lot to us as well. So no pressure, but if you're ever able to, we really do appreciate it. It really does help. Also, shout out to everybody who's been early adopters and joined. I've been kind of pleasantly surprised. It's been picking up traction, even though it's been up only a couple of days. And yeah, just everybody who's jumped right in there right away and giving us a shot it's really appreciated.
Yeah, can't say thank you enough. Like, yeah, hopefully the Discord pops off a little bit more and we can get some more discussions going on there as well. Mostly once Heavy Hitters comes out, because there's going to be a couple of callings that are coming up for limited for heavy hitters in the earlier weeks, right?
Yeah, there's kind of like a calling in each major region. There's Queenstown in New Zealand, there's Hartford in North America, and then there's one in Europe. Is it Warsaw?
Ooh, I am not
I'm not
sure.
sure. Liverpool? I don't know. There's one in Europe for sure that is also limited. I remember this. So all of that's really exciting, and I think that that's going to be the time when the Discord's really going to shine. Jay and I are going to be posting our draft and sealed decks with a little bit of a discussion about like what our thoughts were, what worked well, what didn't work well. Did we like our deck? Are there things we would try to do again, or things we would change? And all of that is super, super valuable when you're starting a new format. And we encourage our listeners to post as well. There's channels where they can post their decks as well. And the more that you can share, the more information you can get early on in the set, the easier it is to pick it up and learn what's good. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today for heavy hitters and also any sets going forward. How do you get started? How do you learn the set as quickly as possible and as best as possible?
Yeah, I guess you want to just get right into it?
Yeah, why don't we do that?
So I guess the best thing to ask for when you are looking at a new set is spoiler season. So we get to look at these cards before a set actually drops. And if you are looking to improve limited, yes, the Majestics are kind of cool and flashy. They're great for constructed. And also the rares are very powerful a lot of the times. But more than that, the main type of cards you're going to be interacting with in limited are going to be the commons. I typically don't even read or look at many of the rares or Majestics before the first event I go to. I kind of read and look at all of the commons because those are the cards you're going to be playing against, and those are the cards you're going to be playing with.
Yeah, I can kind of add on to that. The thing is, like, you're going to see way more commons than you are any other type. So you want to know what kind of game plans are enabled by those commons. And those are going to be the ones that are the most repeatable and the most easy to execute, like draft to draft or sealed pool to sealed pool. So it's really important to think about the commons. Our approach differs a little, like just a little bit, in that I feel like I'm consistently like thinking about the rares just a little more than you are. I know you're kind of like, I might not get the rares. I'm like more willing to look at the rares, especially for me. The big ones are the rares that are like very impactful or feel kind of like build around. So like a good example from Bright Lights was Hydraulic Press. That's the 6 power scrap overpower card. Hydraulic Press ended up being kind of like a game plan in and of itself, where you could potentially like recur it with red backup protocol and use it to push through boom grenades and dash IO, and that was really important. So I might not be looking at like every rare and being like, my deck's going to have Spring a Leak instead of Panel Beater. They're both 2 for 5 boosts, but Spring a Leak has a better on hit. Like, that's not really what I'm interested in. But if there's powerful ones that are kind of like enablers for game plans or like change how your deck functions, I'm often looking for those rares and keeping an eye out for those. Even if I can't count on it, it's nice to be able to identify the important rares, and when you have them, recognize, oh, I have this card and it allows me to do something a little bit different with my deck than I would be able to if I didn't have this rare. So look for those power rares, but yeah, mostly you're focused on the commons and how they play together.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. For me, I approach it a little bit differently. I honestly don't look at almost any of the rares at all. I wait until about the pre-releases to come around. I'm mainly looking to see which rares are like, once my opponent plays it, am I going, wow, this is unfair? And every time I say that to myself, it's like, wow, this card is unfair. I know that card has to be good in some way, or in some scenarios, it has to become good. That's when I typically start looking at, like, how do I maximize this unfair card? I always feel like when I read a card or, like, try to evaluate a card, I misevaluate it somewhere, mostly during spoiler season. I read a card and it looks powerful, and when you start playing with it, it's actually not that powerful. And I think the prime example of that card was, like, in Monarch, there was the brute specialization. I forgot her name. Levia?
Soul Harvest?
Soul Harvest. Man, Soul Harvest looked so good when I first read it. And then when you play with it, it's just a blue with a 3 block and a 6 power.
Yeah.
Costs way too much to play.
Yeah, occasionally you can like play it second cycle and it's pretty cool, but yeah, it's definitely like not as playable as it looks, and that's pretty normal. Like it's hard to get all your evaluations right, and I really like that Jay mentioned this, but listen, I think like a really good gauge for how good a card is kind of like your gut feeling. So pay attention to your gut feeling when you are playing against a card, like Jay said. So if somebody plays a card against you and you go, man, I really don't care about them playing that card. It might be worth noting what card is that and why was it not impactful? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but if you keep playing against that card and you're like, I don't care when my opponent plays that card, that's a really useful piece of feedback. Similarly, when you first draw up your hand and you're figuring out what to do, if you keep winding up, like if you keep noticing a certain card is like, why is this in my hand? Or this isn't very good in this hand. And you're noticing that's a consistent thing that comes up with a card. It's probably not a card that you want in your deck. And similarly, if you're always drawing a card, or if you're always going, what is my out to win this game? Oh, I need to draw this card. I really hope I draw this card. That's a really good indication that that card is really doing well and performing well for you. And I think this even extends to constructed. Like our gut is usually pretty good at identifying how good or bad a card is, and just pay attention to how frequently those feelings are coming up, I think is the big thing.
Corner cases do occur, so you'll be like looking at a card where, wow, in this exact scenario where my opponent had exactly one card, this card is unbeatable. And this stuff is important too, because how do you recreate that situation where this card is good is something that's going to be very important in like solving a limited format, or more so having an edge against other people is looking and finding these like spots where other people aren't looking for yet. And so then you can start picking up these cards that are good in these corner cases and building your deck to support the exact corner case that that card is good in. Like my favorite card from Outsiders was a card called Freewheeling Renegades. Honestly, that's not really a corner case because whenever you played it, it was just kind of insane. But once you start playing with it, or that's a prime example of a card where it is a common, it's not even a rare. And whenever my opponent played that card against me, it felt like I'm like, oh, I didn't expect this one. This card kind of sucked to get played against. It wrecked my hand. And it happened like 4 times or something. And I'm just like, this card is good. And then it turned into my favorite common from Outsiders. Generic common, I guess.
And I like what you said about it happened 4 times. Sometimes, like if a card wins you a game, you can get really convinced that it's a good card, but you need to really be like continually gathering data on each card, kind of like in your head, and thinking about like how often is it good? Is it bad sometimes? Because there's cards that are really good at winning games, but aren't always necessarily good, or they're bad more often than they're good, and that doesn't always make for a good card. So you need to just be careful with that. Don't rely on one data point too much where a card was good or bad. Try to build multiple and think about why the card was good or bad there. It could be that the card's good and you just didn't have the right deck or the right situation for the card is. So, look for multiple data points. You want to carry on here?
We talked about a lot of the commons being, you have to look at it, but of those commons, there are some specific traits that you are looking for, and mainly I'm looking at the block values on all of the commons in the set, and that's mainly because in this game, blocking is such a fundamental portion of the game. You need to know what the average block is in a set. Even if you don't know the exact number, it's not really that useful to know. It's like, oh, it's exactly 2.4 of all the commons in the set, or all the generics in the set, or it's 2.6. Like that doesn't really matter. You need to really know if it's like most of my block cards, or most of the cards that are in my deck are gonna be 2 blocks or 3 blocks, and that will change how you evaluate spots in limited later. And typically it's about less than 3 in most limited sets for average block values, and some sets like Uprising had a slightly lower block value, making it easier for 3 power attacks to connect and be more impactful, whereas like some sets like WTR will have a lot more 3 blocks, making it a slightly harder set to make impactful 6 power attacks. And it's more important to come in for the breakpoint of 7 in sets like WTR than in sets like Uprising. So really looking at if the generics are mainly blocking for 2 or 3, and if your class cards are mainly blocking for 2 or 3. And that will shape how you can approach games against those heroes. So, against ninjas, a lot of their go again cards have 2 blocks, and they end up having less access to 3 blocks. So if you just pummel them for non-breakpoint numbers, it's actually more annoying for them to deal with that than if you were to come in for 7 all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely thinking about the breakpoints is important. And I think also it gives you an idea of like how effective that class is at blocking and how much they want to block. If they have a lot of 3 blocks, they're usually pretty comfortable blocking. If they have a lot of 2 blocks, though, they're usually really not wanting to block. And that usually means that that deck is going to be quite aggressive. And I like the example of Uprising, where like Icelander and Fi in particular have a lot of 2 blocks, and the set was quite aggressive. And the most defensive deck was Dromai, who's kind of characterized by actually having quite a few 3 blocks. So that really does tell you a lot about the set. If you think about like Tales of Aria, Briar kind of has a lot of 2 blocks, does have Embodiment Averse, so it's a little bit different, but does have 2 blocks and wants to play big hands. Lexi wants lots of elemental cards, which are mostly 2 blocks, wants pumps, 2 blocks. And then you have Oldhim, all the Guardian cards block 3. So really good signal of like if a deck can play more defensively or not, and you want to be aware of that. Can this deck fatigue me? Can they block me? Or is just presenting efficient damage going to get the job done? Because often against those decks that don't block well, you can just focus on playing your hands as efficiently as possible, and you don't need to worry too much about fatigue.
I think the breakpoints is kind of important. So like
Mm-hmm.
against Guardians, like hitting for 7 is like kind of really good, but hitting for 6 will lead you to a game where you're probably going to get fatigued. Vice versa, if you're playing against Ninja and you hit them for 6, it's kind of like you're going to win the fatigue rate just by hitting them for 6 continuous multiple turns in a row.
Yeah, the inefficiency in their 3 blocks is really going to add up. The difference between 2 and 3, I think, is something that like a lot of players who have been playing for a long time probably understand. But if you're newer to the game or to limited, like the difference between a 2 and a 3 block is massive. If you think about it percentage wise, a 3 block blocks 50% more than a 2 block. And if you have 2 3 blocks as opposed to 3 2 blocks, you've earned an entire extra card. So like every time you block with like a 3 block instead of a 2 block, it's like almost like half a card like more efficient, which is a lot. Like it's actually massive. It sounds like, oh, it's only 1, but like it is a very, very big difference.
Yeah, like in Flesh and Blood, you're really just looking to see like where do I get that 1 extra damage I missed? And a lot of the times it comes down to, oh, I should have blocked with this card instead of this, or prevented this instead of that. I think one portion of like where win percentage actually gets affected in limited is during the draft portion, where you've mentally checked off that you're like, oh, I want a little bit more 3 blocks in my deck. I'm going to pick this card over a specific card just because it blocks for 1 more. And that's where that 1 point of value may come from. And I feel like that's like an underrated portion of the game too.
Yeah, I've noticed that with my draft decks a lot, that like sometimes the difference between a 3-0 deck and a 2-1 deck is that like in this 3-0 deck, maybe my reds are actually slightly less powerful, but all of my blues block 3. And then you look at my 2-1 deck and it's like, this deck has some really powerful cards, but like half of them are 2 blocks, like half the blues are 2 blocks. I might have like a blue no block in there. Maybe I'm like missing 1 blue, and all of those little like inefficiencies in your deck. It doesn't mean you can't 3-0. Of course, you can draw like the perfect hands and it doesn't matter and you don't get punished. But Flesh and Blood really is a game about consistency because you see so much of your deck. And because of that, you often do end up feeling the difference in that blue base or the difference in the block value of your cards, and those subtle differences. When I look back at my decks, are often like one of the big deciding factors on a 2-1 deck versus a 3-0 deck.
One other aspect of traits on cards I'm looking for, I think is the best way to say it, will be where in the set are the go again stapled on? In Flesh and Blood, like the fundamentals of the game says you get to play 1 action a turn. Obviously, in like if you've played any games of Flesh and Blood, that's not exactly how it goes. Like so many things have go again on it. In limited, you really got to know where that go again is located, or you might have very inefficient turns. Like the worst case scenario in Flesh and Blood is you rip your opponent's whole hand and they get to do nothing. They just drop 4. You look at your hand and you're just like, my turn, my best thing I can do on this turn is attack for 5, and then give your opponent a 2-card hand to start like crawling their way back. So you really need to know, where is the go again in this set? Is it on your hero ability? Does it have to come from your cards in your deck? Does it come from your weapons like Kodachis? How do I enable them is a very important question to ask, and this changes set to set. So like sets with Kodachis is much more different than sets without Kodachis, or like sets with Spider's Bite makes it significantly easier to convert hands. How much you have to value cards with generic go again in your deck, so then you can have more efficient turns when you do get to keep a 4-card or even a 5-card hand.
Yeah, and to tack on to that, it's often going to, even within the same set, the value on those cards can vary a lot between class. If you think about Outsiders, Ninja has pretty free access to Go Again. Most of their cards have Go Again. Their starters do. The combo cards sometimes do, like Bonds and Descendant do if they combo. You also have Kodachi, so Ninja doesn't need that much Go Again. Like you want to draft some, but you're going to find it. Azalea, well, she can pretty much get Go Again from her pumps. So the pumps are really important. If you have a deck of only arrows, your Azalea deck's not going to do much. So you really need to value those pumps highly. And then look at a deck like Uzuri. Uzuri really doesn't have very much Go Again. So sometimes having a card like Looking for a Scrap in Uzuri is really, really high value, because it's one of the few ways you can convert those big hands. You do have the Spider's Bites, and they're pretty good. But things like those pumps, things like the attack reactions that reactions are kind of like Go Again. They don't take your action point, though those become really, really high value. So even within the same set, depending on the hero and how much access they have to Go Again, you may value them differently. And I think one thing to think about in heavy hitters is we have Guardians. Guardians typically don't have Go Again. And what that might mean is that you might want some big attacks, some high costed, like in the past we had like Glacial Footsteps, which was a 6 cost, 10 power attack at red. You might want some attacks like that, or even the blue 6 for 8, so you can convert those bigger hands if you do get stuck with them.
Or how do I make more gold tokens, right?
Sure. Yeah, maybe you can just make more gold tokens and that can be an outlet. Although you probably want something to do with those gold. That's one of my big questions. Like, what are we going to do with gold tokens and limited? Are they good enough on their own? Are there certain payoffs that we want? That's something that's going to be, I think we're going to need to see the cards and we're going to need to play with the set to really feel that out.
Talking about the heroes, heroes are cards you definitely need to read and make sure you know before going into a pre-release, or just honestly any limited experience. Is you should really look up what heroes are draftable and are in the token slot, because it's really, really important knowing what you have access to and what your opponent has access to, no matter what.
Yeah, so when we're looking at these heroes, there are a few different things to look for. I would be thinking about, number one, how impactful is that hero ability? Is this something that I'm making use of like every turn, or wanting to make use of almost every turn? Or is this like a sometimes thing? So you think back to like Icelander. Icelander really incentivizes you to play blue ice cards. And the more you do that, the more frostbites you give them, the more value you get. You want to be triggering that as much as possible. You think about a hero like the Guardians are good examples, like Oldhim. Powerful hero ability, the Ice and the Earth React are very good. You definitely use them, but you're not using them every turn. They're sort of situational. They're good when they're good. The Earth React's good at stopping breakpoints and dominate. The Ice React is good at stopping go wide turns, but you're not necessarily doing that every turn, because 2 block out of your card, even if it goes back into your deck, is good, but it's not something you have to do every turn. So think about how frequently you're using that and how much value you're getting from it. And then I think the final piece is, does your hero tell you to play the game in a certain way? Not all heroes do this, but some of them definitely do. So for example, Dromai really wants reds in her deck. Between her weapon and her hero, it tells you need red cards, because reds are how you give your board Go Again, and reds are how you make ash. So you need to pitch reds to get ash. So you know that you need a high red count, and you know that you want reds with Go Again. And you can learn all that from the hero and the weapon. Another good example of this is Briar and Rosetta Thorn. Briar says if you've played 2 non-attack actions, you get an embodiment of lightning, which gives your next thing go again. Rosetta Thorn wants you to play non-attacks and attacks, so you often have the play pattern of non-attack, non-attack, attack action, and then end on Rosetta Thorn. And I think just recognizing that this is what my Briar deck is trying to do, ideally turn to turn, is already massive, because well, now I need non-attacks and attacks, and I want to build curves that let me go non-attack, non-attack, attack into my Rosetta Thorn off of a blue. So I want that all to add up to 3 resources, and all of that kind of starts from the hero. And there's so many examples of this. Icelander, wanting to play blue from Arsenal, wanting to play something that costs 3 on their turn, and then wanting to Arsenal blue. So you want like 3 blues per hand. All of that is learned from Waning Moon and Icelander's hero text. And so often the heroes and the weapons are the biggest clues to how to build the deck. And as a starting point, try to do what the hero and the weapon is telling you to do. Sometimes there's kind of like sideways strategies, but more often than not, really leaning into maximizing the hero and the weapon ability is a great place to be in Limited.
This is a common pattern in all TCGs that share this hero-based, or like if you choose a character to play as, such as Flesh and Blood, like a hero. The game designers made the set with the intentions for you to play with these heroes. They are going to seed in cards that work very well and work with your hero. So if you just like blindly follow what the designers of the game make it look like they want to tell you something, you should just follow it. And that's typically the most cohesive and the most powerful thing you can do with those cards. And obviously that might change depending on, like, as you said, sideways strategies, but that can be discovered later. And you really just want to like look for these like front door strategies first. And then the next meta up is, how do I beat these front door strategies? So I don't think you should be looking for these like sideways strategies from the get-go. That should be discovered after your like first 5 drafts, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And another way to think about it is your hero and your weapon. You have those in play from the start of the game every single game. So we talked about Flesh and Blood, the importance of being able to repeat your game plan because you see so much of your deck. Like Flesh and Blood really is a game where you can go, I'm going to win this game with this combination of cards or this kind of play. And you can play towards that, especially in Limited where your deck is quite small. Playing towards like what you have on board is one of the best ways to have consistency, because you don't even have to draw it, right? Like your weapon and your hero are just always there. So if your whole deck plays well with your weapon and your hero, then most of your hands are going to be pretty good. But if all your synergy is in just the cards in deck and you kind of ignore your hero, it's still fine, but then you're relying on drawing certain combinations of cards rather than kind of like making the most out of the cards you already have in play.
And I think one last point I would have to say about the weapons is, how strong is the weapon are in fatigue, right? So fatigue is like not a side strategy, but it's definitely a portion of the game where you do have to be conscious about. Mainly, if a hero can play into this fatigue style, like the the ninjas or the guardians, really rely on how powerful the weapons are in fatigue scenarios. So Kodachi is very powerful once your opponent's at 1 life, and you get to pitch 1 card and attack twice with it, and that really rips cards out of your opponent's hands. And so is something like Anathos in WTR, where once you swing the hammer, it really rips 2, maybe even 3 cards out of your opponent's hand while being able to pitch the card and keep your deck thick as well. Knowing beforehand that if the weapon is good in fatigue scenarios when both players have like 7-8 cards left in deck is a indicator on how you can approach a specific game once it starts to get in that spot. And vice versa, if your weapon kind of sucks at fatiguing, you really need to know that you're the one that is in danger if life totals are high and both players are starting to run out of cards, and they maybe get to pivot and stop blocking you and attacking your deck count instead of attacking your life total. So you need to be aware of that and when to really have to go deep into your hands and start converting your life totals into attacking.
Yeah, I really like all those points. I think I'll even add that for me, thinking about this starts before the game even begins. Typically, usually the decks that have a lot of three blocks and strong fatigue weapons are the ones that can fatigue you. You look at a deck like Teklo relies on Teklo Leveler. Almost all of his deck blocks three. You look at a deck like Oldhim, has Titan's Fist, has recyclable ways to block, has lots of three blocks, has defense reactions. So that's usually how you know if a deck wants to fatigue you or is able to potentially fatigue you. And having a plan for that going into the matchup is pretty important. And like Jay said, you want to know, how does my endgame line up against theirs? Am I going to be favored in a long game or not? And this is why in a set like, what is it? Outsiders, you could actually have more control Katsu strategies. You could have Katsu decks that have more three blocks, and you can go, well, I know that my end game's actually pretty good because I can swing two Kodachis for free, and I might actually be able to play a longer game quite comfortably. But you kind of need to have that in the back of your head to begin with, and you kind of want to know, am I favorite? If this game goes really long, is that good for me or is that bad for me? And if that's good for me, I can potentially play towards playing a long game and playing a little more defensively and playing more of an attrition style where I grind them down. Or if that's really bad for me, maybe I'm playing Max from Bright Lights, and I know that, well, when I don't have any cards in deck I can't boost and I can't swing Banksy, I need to find a way to kill them or end the game before I run out of cards in deck. And that's like a really, really important distinction to make. And you need to figure it out probably during deck building, ideally. But new set, there might be some surprises, but at least be thinking about this when you're building your deck, when you're sitting down playing a match and you look at their hero and you go, if I had to guess which one of us is better in fatigue, and am I wanting to make the game shorter or am I wanting to make the game longer? That's like a really important distinction.
Yeah, there's also this like weird meta thing going on where once you reveal your heroes, you got to choose like your deck, right? How many cards you want to put in your deck. So I remember was it Outsiders with Riptide? In the Riptide mirror, you flip over your hero, we're both Riptide, and you're like, okay, let's see how many cards I can fit into this deck. And just like, how many cards do you have? 38? I have 39.
Yeah.
And that's because like the hero is really, really bad at, the weapon is really bad at in the fatigue scenarios, but Riptide does get access to a lot of three blocks. Well, if you play the Riptide mirror like once or twice, you start to find out that, oh, if I just have more cards than my opponent, they just run out of cards first. And then both players start doing this, and you're like, okay, I guess I'm putting all of my 2 blocks in and trying to fatigue my opponent's Riptide deck out. And it comes down to like some really interesting gameplays of like playing really cards you thought were unplayable seems really good once they start blocking for 2.
Yeah, it is funny how that can really matter, and that's something that you might get a feel for. You might not recognize that the first time that you sit down to play the Riptide mirror, but that's sort of where reps and practice come in, and kind of playing to learn is really important. Where you go, oh, this game came down to fatigue. I wonder if all Riptide games come down to fatigue. Maybe you play 1 or 2 more. Oh yeah, they always seem to come down to fatigue. So maybe I want to be adding more cards to my deck. How much can I get away with before my deck's just too bad and I fall behind because my deck is too bad? And that's sort of like the balancing act that you're trying to make. But a lot of it is sort of like you try something out, you see how it works, and then you pay attention to if you need to make adjustments or not, and go from there and see how those adjustments work.
Typical a line that I set for myself at least is if a card blocks for less than 1 and generates, or sorry, not less than 1 or less, and if it generates maybe like 1 point of like power or damage, card probably not good enough. Don't quote me yet, because there still might be a set where a 1 block, like 1 attack go again might just be good enough in a set. But to my knowledge so far, cards like that is not that good. So like Blue Brush Off was kind of bad in Riptide. But yeah, it like that was the line. Like I wouldn't play Blue Brush Off in Riptide, but all 2 blocks I would play.
So we've kind of been talking a lot about what to look for when spoilers hit. And I just want to give you a quick rundown of kind of like the basics, and then we'll talk about some kind of more advanced concepts. So the big ones that we talked about are pay attention to the commons, a little bit of the rares, but the commons are really what you're going to be seeing. Look for the block values on generics and class cards. Is it mostly 3 blocks? Is it mostly 2 blocks, or a mix? That tells you how defensively a class can play, and it kind of plays into that fatigue piece that we talked about. Look for go again. Where is it staple? Do you have access to go again? Do you have lots of go again, so it's not such a high priority and you can always convert your hand? Or are you a class that has go again in very limited spots and you need to really prioritize picking up that go again when you see it? Then pay attention to the hero abilities and the weapons and how those play together. How can you maximize them? And using kind of like all of these pieces together, what I would start looking for, this could be during spoiler season, this could be before your pre-release, this could be even after your pre-release, but start looking for efficient plays and efficient ways to spend your resources. This is sort of how I've always approached Limited, and it's still how I approach Limited, and this is even how I approach Constructed, actually. They're very similar. Basically, you're trying to look for maximizing the total value per hand. So you want to get as much total block and attack value as you can out of your hand. So if you block with 2 cards for 3 each, you've gotten 6 value. You attack with a 3 for 7, you've gotten 7 value out of that attack. Your total value for that hand is 6 block plus 7 attack. That's 13. And so you've gotten 13 out of your hand. And you're basically just trying to make that number as big as possible, as consistently as you can. So how do you do this? Look for your best 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 card plays. So if I have a 1 card hand, maybe I can swing my weapon. If I have a 2 card hand, maybe I can pitch a card, play a big attack. If I have a 3 card hand, how can I make use of that 3 card hand? And sometimes heroes are only good at certain hand sizes. Like not every hero has good options for all 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They often shine more at the big hand sizes or the small hand sizes or somewhere in the middle. There's like often a sweet spot, but figuring that out is really important. And you just want to look for, like, in a vacuum, what are the best combinations of cards that produce these high value plays over and over again? And are there certain cards that play really well, like interchangeably with one another? So like often these are kind of like similar classes of cards. So in Azalea, you notice if I have all arrows, it's bad. If I have no arrows, it's bad. I want a combinations of arrows and pumps. And I don't want too many of the 1-cost pumps, because if I have too many 1-cost pumps, I can't pay for it in my 1-cost arrow. So you start kind of figuring out, okay, I want mostly 0-cost pumps, maybe a couple 1-costs, and a bunch of arrows. And you're sort of looking for like the most efficient plays that you can make with that hero. And I think this is like a really, really big part of identifying powerful limited decks, and also even a big part of building a constructed deck from scratch is like, what are my most efficient hands? How can I squeeze the most powerful play out of each of these hand sizes, and figuring out which cards are needed for that, and approach it almost like constructed, because you get to draft your deck, right? So like out of the commons, what's the best hand that I can make is like often something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, wow, you said that perfectly. Yeah, and like in Sealed too, you don't get to draft your deck, but still looking for which hero do I play to have, to exactly what you said, you know, how which hero lets me maximize all my cards in my pool would be the best indicator to see which hero to choose from when building a deck. And Sealed has this, not an issue, but this feature. Some hero what's the best way of saying it? Like, some heroes are just better at converting cards than others, and having more efficient, like 5-card hands, 4-card hands, such as like ninjas. Ninjas are really good at just like converting cards because all of their cards have go again. But identifying when you have a pool that is a good Guardian deck, a good some other deck, Dromai deck, will let you really increase your win percentage a significant portion of the time. So Sealed is a format where a lot of people that I know will be like, oh, this is the best hero, I'm just gonna disregard the other cards, other class cards, and just always build that one hero. That strategy is okay if you don't think you have enough time to like put together the perfect Sealed deck after registering your hero. That's okay as well, but it's not the most efficient. And I think all of the best players would always look at which hero is the best, and then like actually evaluate that through looking at what possible hands you can put together with that hero. And some heroes are really powerful. Like Dromai in Sealed is very, very powerful if you have all the right cards. It's just hard to get all the right cards. So I don't know if I said that well, but if you get my gist, Yuki.
Yeah, yeah, no, I absolutely think so. I think a lot of people think that sealed is like a little bit more random and a little bit more low agency than it is. I think that at a surface level it can feel that way, but the more that you're willing to dig in, the more that, like Jay talked early on about corner cases, the more that you're able to recognize, hey, Max usually isn't fantastic and sealed, but I have a really good Max deck here. I have the boost cards to support it. I have I don't know, maybe some access to overpower. I have like a big shot. Like I have a really good Max deck, and I should be playing Max with this sealed pool. When you can recognize those spots, that's kind of how you're increasing your win percentage. And it might not feel like it because like you build one deck for the event, but if you were to play like 5, 6 different sealed events, the better you are at identifying these different spots where you can play different heroes, the better you're going to do across all of those events. So you might not always feel that difference from like one event to the next, or it might be like really pronounced. Like this event, like I had a terrible Teklo deck, but I had an insane Max deck. Like you'll really feel it, but then other times you won't. So it's like, it's hard to notice on one event some of the time, but if you play lots of sealed, you'll find that the better you are at this, the more you're going to win.
What One thing I just want to add is there is a method of practice. I might be skipping ahead a little bit, but a method of practicing this exact thing that I love doing, or to me it's not really practice. Like I really like sealed, so like I would do this with like people if I can convince them somehow, is playing 6-pack sealed with them and then doing a round robin of how do I explain this? You're playing sealed and you open up your pool and you're playing a best of 3 against your opponent who has a sealed pool as well. And what you have to do is you have to play with every available hero in the set. So in Uprising is an easiest example. You have to make a Phi deck, you have to make an Icelander deck, and you have to make a Dromai deck. And then you play that against your opponent's Phi deck, Icelander deck, and Dromai deck. And then you can play a best 2 of 3. You can either randomize the heroes or you can only play mirrors. That's completely up to you. I've done all the different possibilities. We've like drafted who gets to fight which heroes and stuff like that too. It's kind of fun. Mainly what this does is it allows you to like really explore your sealed pool a lot. Obviously, this isn't good for like, at the calling, it's already too late once you've opened your pool.
Mm-hmm.
But to prep for a sealed calling, I think this is like a really strong way of like actually exploring sealed pools and commons and like seeing what kind of cards, like when you're forced to play with a really, really limited pool of cards, that really gets you to explore new strategies and stuff like that. So like, I really recommend this method of like being forced to build a deck for each hero and then play each of those heroes against a lot of different heroes of your opponent's sealed pool. So this does take a lot of time. It takes like an hour and a half, but like, yeah, I love doing this. It's hard to convince people to do this because it does take a whole day, and not everyone is like this dedicated into like just like playing limited in general. But yeah, this is what I would recommend.
Yeah. This is a great method to practice. I've done this. I've definitely learned a lot when I do this. I think the important thing is like, yes, you want to try to win and you want to try to maximize your win percentage with each of these decks. But like your takeaway from those games is not just, wow, I won or I lost, or wow, my Teklo deck was so good and my Max and my Dash deck was so bad. You really want to identify like, what made one of those decks really good and what made one of those decks really bad? Did one of those bad decks have certain hands that were good and you just didn't have enough of those hands? So that gives you a hint of like, if I have lots of this combination of cards, my deck is actually pretty good. Those are the kind of takeaways that you're looking for. So it's important to think about like your mindset when you're going into this. Like, it is, you want to try to win, you want to try your best, but it is also a learning exercise, and you should be looking to learn and get takeaways from it, not just play the games and kind of discard them. So really having that like learning mindset, I think, is important for limited in general, but especially if you're doing an exercise like that where you're really trying to learn, because some of the decks are gonna feel bad, and like you kind of know that going in, and don't get too hung up on how bad it feels. Think about, why was it bad? How would it be better? What does it need to be good? Those are the kinds of questions you want answered when you're doing that exercise.
I think there's like a famous quote where it's like, was like a master's lost more times than like you've ever played or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like, don't be scared of losing. Like, you're
Yeah.
gonna lose. Like, it's a TCG. There are gonna be luck involved with it. Even the best players only have something like a 70 or 80% win rate. Obviously it could get a little bit more inflated, but that means they still lose like 20% of the time, 1 in 5 games. If they play like 100 games, they're losing, 20, 30 games. Like, it's a lot of games you're losing. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, like, the sheer number of games you can get in really does just like accumulate, and the more games you can play, the stronger you are at honestly anything you do, right? Like, so limited is no exception. Like, the more you play, the stronger you're gonna get. And it's tough. Like, some people that I know around here that, like, it's their 30th time on the set is like much harder to beat than if it's someone's like third draft or fourth draft, and
Mm-hmm.
it really
Mm-hmm.
shows.
Yeah, no, it really, really, really does. I actually realized we kind of missed a point. So jumping back just slightly before we carry on, when you're sitting down and you're trying to maximize your total value per hand, you're trying to figure out what are the good plays for this hero. Like a really good rule of thumb is like you want to spend all your resources. So you're either building your turns to play off of 3 resources or 6 resources. Perhaps if you have an equipment like a hardened cross strap or a Sash of Sandakai, these ones that make resources and let you cheat on resources, it might be thinking about like what it might be good to think about like one specific hand where you can make use of those extra resources and really like, I'm looking for this combination of cards to make use of this equipment and have a power play. That's important. But turn to turn, you're really looking to spend either 3 or 6 resources. Just the way that Flesh and Blood cards are templated, their cost and their power kind of go up hand in hand. It's a linear relationship between the two of them. And you always want to be kind of you want to be pitching blues because they're the best at pitching, and you want to be spending all of your resources. So, and this is like how you realize things about decks. Like you think about Fi. Fi really wanted the head jabs. Why did he want the head jabs? Because, well, with a head jab, you can go head jab, Searing Ember Blade for 2. It gets to go again from the head jab, spend 1 for my Phoenix Flame. Now I have a 2-card 7. If I add on a Lava Burst, it goes up from there. And that was really what you wanted in Fi. Whereas if you had a bunch of 1 costs, you could wind up with these hands where you actually can't swing Searing Ember Blade anymore, and you were losing out. So you really want to think about that resource curve and how to spend 3 resources efficiently, and also put a high premium on cards that are more flexible. So we kind of talked about like the 0 cost and Fi. You want lots of 0 costs, because if you have too many 1 costs, even if that's like technically kind of more efficient, like you can go head jab, leg tap, Searing Ember Blade, Phoenix Flame, and you've gotten like 1 more damage out of having that leg tap there. That is good, and you want some of that. But sometimes just being more consistent, just being like, I'm always going to swing my Searing Ember Blade every turn, and I'm not going to have these turns where I brick and draw too many 1 costs, is actually just more powerful. So think about how to spend your cards as efficiently as possible, and also put a high premium on just flexible hands. Like, no matter which combination of these cards I draw together, I have a functional hand. That's powerful in its own way. So try to value not only the biggest number, but also how do you get a big number consistently. You don't want to have like, this never happens, but you don't want to have a deck that like your hand's worth 20 or 0. You'd rather have a deck that's worth like 15 every time.
I think an easy way to visualize this is like imagining the exact same deck, the Fire deck, but you have a bunch of 1 costs, and you just draw like 2 1 costs in the blue, and you're like, well, if your arsenal is stuck with like a Lava Burst, you just go 1 cost, 1 cost. You play the 1 cost for 4, 1 cost for 4, activate Fire, and attack with Phoenix Flame, which is like kind of mediocre. or you have to strand this one cost in your hand and like attack for 4 and Ember Blade and do nothing else. I guess you got to pitch the one cost to return the Phoenix Flame. But it's like you can already see that like that's a hand where it ends up bricking you out more often than, and the scenarios when it does brick you off really does, what's the word here? Not mitigate, but like makes your deck worse because those situations can happen. Because in Flesh and Blood you just draw so many, you get to play your hand so many times and play your deck so many times. It's just going to happen the more often you have inefficient cards in your deck, and it will just naturally come up more often if your deck is always, if you're, man, I'm so bad at explaining this.
Yeah, no, I think you're getting it across. Like you see so much of your deck that you do draw these hands, and also like another thing to think about is like the difference between having the you know the leg tap in there so you get your one extra value out of that turn. Like you're gaining one value every time it lines up. But if you're missing, like, I don't know exactly how much you're missing. If you're missing like a Searing Emberblade swing, you're missing like 2 value. So then you think about it like that means like every 2 times, if I hit the 1 cost and the 0 cost together, so I can swing Searing Emberblade and I gain that 1 efficiency twice, and then I brick once, like it just comes out in the wash and it's the same, and I just have a more inconsistent deck. So often you're not gaining that much, and sometimes just like having a more consistently pretty good value is better, because like the bricks can be really painful. Like 2 is even generous. Sometimes the bad hands can lose like 3, 4, 5 value compared to a good hand, and just minimizing the amount of times you do that can be like completely game altering.
It's match altering. It's event altering, honestly.
Yeah, true. Like that can be the difference between being, I don't know, getting to play for your win in versus getting to play to min cash in your last round. So yeah, and usually these decks, if you're playing a lot of 3 cost turns, you want about 8 to 9 blues as a starting point. If you're playing a lot of like 6 cost turns, you might want like 15 blues ish, 15, 16, 18, somewhere in there. And if you're like Icelander, where like you want 3 blues because you pitch a blue to play your arsenal, you pitch a blue to play a red card on your turn, and then you arsenal a blue, so you kind of want like 3 blues every hand. You might want like 21, 22 blues in your deck. So just as like, these aren't hard and fast rules, but for a 30 card deck, kind of think about if you want 1, 2, or 3 blues in your average hand, and then you probably want about 8, 15, or 21 blues in your deck as a result. And there's like a little bit of wiggle room there. As you play the deck more, you might get a feel for this deck can actually play a little higher or wants a little bit lower. There's some variability in there, but these are really good kind of like starting points for blue counts, and then you can tweak and adjust as you get more experience.
Where did this number come from? These 8, 15, and 21? Like I've seen these numbers like ever since I started playing the game, and I'm just like,
it's sort of like, it's just like a math thing where if you have a 30 card deck, 8 blues means that you have about like 1 blue per hand, because like 4 times 8 is 32. So it maximizes your chances of drawing exactly 1 blue. Similarly, if you have 15 blues, it maximizes your chances of drawing exactly 2 blues. If you go up in blues, you have like, I don't know how to say it. You will see 2 blues more often, but you'll also see like 1 and 3 blues more often. So like if you're always wanting like exactly 2, then 15 is usually the best. But
okay, so
if you want like 2 or more, then you can have like higher, is kind of how it works. So it's kind of like a third of your deck, half of your deck, or 2/3 of your deck you want blue, depending on if you want 1, 2, or 3 blues in your deck. That's kind of how the math works out.
I see. So some kind of math nerd, when the game first came out, was like, oh, I want to know what these numbers are, and decided to share with the community. Man, that's TCGs, and it's crazy. Like Magic the Gathering with their like exact land numbers and like how many like colors of each land you need. All of these things are like, people math it out beforehand. You just need to look for it, ask people, and I think like if you ask the right people, like pros on Twitter, they'll tell you, right? Like just like what these numbers are that are like universally accepted at this point.
And there's like wiggle room there. Like there's definitely like decks where I'm like, I want to lean more towards 7 blues, or I want to lean more towards like 9 or 10 blues in my aggro deck. And it just kind of depends like how important is it that you have that blue? Can you make use of extra blues well? Like all of these things are factors, but as a starting point, start here, and then you can adjust pretty easily if you go, oh, I need an extra blue. Even like if you're playing sealed for the first time, don't be afraid to throw in an extra blue. If you play a couple of games and you're like, you know what, I feel like I could use an extra blue, give it a shot. Why not? So I think that's kind of like our fundamentals on like what to look for in a new set. And then we have just like a couple other questions or topics here to round out our discussion. These ones should be kind of like briefer points. But are you ready to move on to those other topics, Jay?
Oh yeah. I think we talked enough about exactly what to do when a set drops.
Mm-hmm.
Which question do you want to start with?
Okay, so let's say that you're going to go play a pre-release. How much of the set have you looked at before you play the pre-release?
Typically, it depends on if the pre-release is worth a lot. So like if I needed to like practice for a calling. So for heavy hitters exactly, I'll be looking at the whole set beforehand. But typically if there isn't a sealed event or a draft event coming up really quickly, I have I like to keep myself in the dark more than to know the whole set. So like I like the experience of being like my opponent plays a card and I go, holy, it's just like I got blown out by this card. So I typically don't look at everything, and then I like getting destroyed by people that way. But if I am preparing for some event for heavy hitters, I'll be going through every single card, looking at like all the numbers on all the cards and seeing which cards are more efficient than others to prep for callings. But my personal take is I like going into pre-releases blind. What about you, Yuki?
Yeah, I think really similar. I do a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, like start thinking about efficient plays, start thinking about, how to build all these heroes. I've been doing like more of that lately because we have the podcast and we're like trying to give people tips for pre-release. So sometimes we kind of like have to think about it more. But like if I don't have the podcast to record, or if I'm just like not prepping for anything, my preference is like I'll probably like read the spoilers as they come out, but not think too much about limited overall. Like I won't think critically too much. I'll just be kind of like, oh, like KO gets lots of 6 powers. Olympia wants like wager car. It's like I'll think like really broad strokes like that, and then kind of try and figure it out. I think that's kind of the most fun for me. But yeah, if I'm looking to prep pretty seriously, I'll do more of this like finding efficient plays, figuring out which cards are replaceable, all the kind of stuff that we've been talking about in this episode so far.
Look, limited's supposed to be limited, like you're supposed to have some limited, it's supposed to limit you on the amount of cards you can play with, and true, not the joy, but like the upside of limited is you don't actually need to own all the cards before you start playing, or you don't need to know all the stuff before you start playing. It should be an experience where you get to play and enjoy by not knowing everything about the set. Like it should be like that, like you should be able to find out this is the things that would work.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm like showing my age here a little bit, but for me limited takes me back to like it takes me back to like feeling like a kid playing a card game where like I remember as a kid, like we had the internet, but just like information was not as available, or like I wasn't looking for information as readily as well, but like it also just like wasn't as available. So like you would open a booster pack and you just be like, wow, I had no idea that these cards existed. Like it's not like like I'm looking for, like I'm hoping to hit like my L and I know what those L's are, or like like you don't know everything. You just like see a card and you're like, wow, this is a new card, that's so cool. I love having that experience in limited. Or even if it's like a little bit later and I know the cards, I like being like, oh man, I opened a lay waste. This lay waste is so sick. But like, like if I'm like cracking a box from my collection or something, like I don't care about that lay waste. It's just going in the bulk pile. But it lets you get like excited about these commons, and that's really cool. Or like Jay like gets his like yellow brandish 12th pick and it's like, oh, we got there, yellow brandish. Like when else do you get to get excited about yellow brandish? Like there's something really special there. And like for me, like leaning into that is a big part about enjoying limited. Is like the scrappiness of it, like making the most of what you got is really it's fun.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I do get very excited about yellow brandish. It's also like the fact that like I'm like looking at a pack and there's like 13 12 cards left in it, and I'm like, what's my wheel card? do I get this
Mhm.
brandish back? And then I pass it. And if it does come around, I'm like, I did it. I did it. It's like, this was the card I wanted the fourth pick, but I know I shouldn't. And then when I get it back on my, like, 10th pick instead, or 9th, 11th pick, it feels so good.
Yeah, it does. It's like you got two picks out of the pack. It's really, really sweet when you can identify those spots. Okay, so jumping ahead just a little bit, we kind of talked about prepping for pre-release or your first limited event of a set. What about when you're actually playing that set? You're sitting down to play your pre-release. You're sitting down to play your world premiere in Queenstown. Whatever your first experience with a limited set is, what do you think is the most important things in that experience when you're sitting down? Like, what are you thinking about? What are you trying to get out of that experience? What are you focused on?
Yeah, so I think this has two different answers, really. Depends on what your goal is.
Mhm.
If your goal is to win, I think the most important would be to, as you said, like looking for ways to maximize your deck. That would be number one for me. The second answer is, if I'm there to have fun, I'm really looking for scrappy combos and like really interesting things I can do with my limited deck. Looking for niche combos is what I like doing, and even if it
Mhm.
is my first one, I'll be looking for these, like, three specific commons in a row that makes for mini combos. So, for example, cards that, like, let's say, lets you look at the top card of your deck and then you activate Azalea to dominate. Things like small things like that really do add up. Looking for those mini combos is what I think is going to be the most important. Honestly, the most fun. I think that's for me.
Yeah, I like how you draw the distinction between like fun and trying to win. And I kind of want to reframe the fun a little bit because I think for me, like I'm a pretty competitive player. I play Flesh and Blood for fun. I have more casual fun events for sure. But like on the whole, I'm trying to get good at Flesh and Blood and win. For me, a lot of it is like it's not just fun. It's like long term versus short term. So if I'm really incentivized to win that sealed event, like maybe I'm playing the calling Hartford and my goal is to win that calling when there's, or sorry, not the calling Hartford. Sure, calling Hartford, but also calling Queenstown was what I was thinking of because it's like the set's brand new. If I'm playing in that event, I really am going to be focusing on like simple, repeatable game plans. Play your value plan. Just do the most basic thing because it's the most likely to work and there's the least that can go wrong. Just like do something simple. Keep it not too complicated. That's what I would be focused on. But otherwise, like if I'm playing a pre-release or I'm playing an event that doesn't really matter, and I know that I have Hartford coming in a couple weeks, I'm playing to learn, not just because I want to have fun, but because I want to learn as much as I can about the set so that when I get to Hartford, I've done all that learning. Whether I win my pre-release or not is kind of like there's promos, it's sweet, it feels good to win, but like in the scheme of things, who cares? What I really want is to be as prepared for Hartford as I can. And the way to do that is learn as much about the set as possible. So if I have like a sweet majestic and I'm like, I don't know if this majestic's good, but I want to know if it's good or not, so that if I see it in the future, I know I open an Oakenold. Should I be building around this Oakenold, or is the double fuse too hard to pull off? That's like a really valid question that you might not know the first time you play with the card, and it's worth figuring out. But you don't get to see those M's or those rares all the time, and just playing with them when you get the chance, super valuable experience. Similarly, and I think this is kind of why, like in Bright Lights, I ended up being a player that drafted all three heroes. I know that at Worlds I drafted a lot of Dash IO, and that's how I leaned. But like I was comfortable drafting Teklovos and I was comfortable drafting Max. A lot of that for me was that I played some pre-releases, I played some Teklovosin, I played a couple of drafts of them, and I'm like, I get how to draft Teklovosin. And if I just want to win, I can keep drafting Teklovosin, but I'm not learning anything from just playing Teklovosin over and over again. Or what I'm learning is like diminishing returns, like I know most of it. But what I don't know is what a good max deck looks like. Like at the starter format, I had no idea what a good max deck looks like. I was playing max and I was getting destroyed. And I can give up and go, well, I shouldn't play max. Or I can take the other approach of, well, how do I build a good max deck? What does a good max deck look like? And maybe the conclusion is like there isn't one, but I want to figure that out before I get to the calling or the PT. I want to know like what does a good version of each of these decks look like? how do I get into each of these decks? Is it worth trying to draft this deck, or is it a total write-off? But I want to have actually explored it, not just go, I played 2 drafts with each deck. I went 2-0 with Teklo and I lost with the other two. I'm just going to draft Teklo. The other decks are trash. Like that's not really like what I'm trying to do. I'm really trying to like learn as much as I can about each of the decks rather than like win those armories and those pre-releases.
Yeah, I agree with you a lot on that. I think in our locals, I'm typically the ones that go. I go even a little bit deeper. I'm looking to play really really bad commons and rares together to see if they work or not. So there'll be a lot of times where you'll see me in an armory draft where you'll look at my deck and you'll be like, why is these cards like, why do you have multiple memorial grounds in your deck? And I'm like, I'm seeing if they're even playable or not. Like, I don't know if there's like combinations of Memorial Ground decks that might even be playable. And Memorial Ground is a Monarch card that puts an action card to the top of your deck. I've been in spots where the conclusion was Memorial Ground was better than a Bauble, and there are decks where I'm okay with having a Bauble in Prism. So I ended up playing Memorial Grounds in Prism at certain points. You come to these weird conclusions as, oh man, what is that defense reaction to Monarch called that was really bad?
Rise Above.
Rise Above. Yellow Memorial Grounds is better than red Rise Above, is my final take on Monarch Limited when we were prepping for national seasons. And I don't know if that like benefits anybody, like, having that information, but definitely for me it does benefit me because at nationals, like Canadian nationals, I did have a spot where I picked up a Memorial Ground and I made one of my decks at Nats. So it's just like, I had that choice and I knew which one was better. It's like, and it was like it's clearly Memorial Grounds is better than Rise Above Red. It's kind of funny.
and I love that you bring this up because I think I know that like on the podcast, especially people listening this deep, you're probably either like limited or interested in getting better at limited. But I know that like a big frustration for a lot of people with limited is feeling like, oh, it's low agency. I have a train wreck draft. I don't know, like I couldn't do anything. I just had a bad draft deck and then I went 0-3 and then I was out of the event. I hate limited. Like this is like the number one complaint that I hear. And I'm sure like Jay's laughing because he's heard this too, right?
Oh yeah.
This is like the number one complaint. And this is like why when I'm drafting at an armory, when I'm drafting at these other things, I'm looking for experience. Like I'm not looking to win. I'm looking for the most experience I can so that when I go in Nats and everybody's like, like people are forcing Prism, so I can't play Prism. The two people passing to me are on Chain. I can't play Chain. I'm not seeing good Bolton cards, and I'm like, I have to draft Levia. Like, if I don't draft Levia, I'm gonna have a bad time. I have to draft Levia. I want to know how to do that. And then people pivot into Levia and cut me, and I go, well, how do I make the most out of a shitty Levia deck? And luckily, I've drafted some really bad Levia decks, and I know how to like not make that deck good, but make it less bad. and like it sounds stupid, right? But like this actually happened in nationals. I had a Levia draft deck where I ended up being the third Levia because 2 people ended up pivoting into Levia alongside me. I knew that when there's 3 Levias, all you do is you pick the 6s because your Dread Screamers don't matter because you don't have enough 6s to turn your Dread Screamers on. So you just pick as many 6s as you can. And then I played Levia Mirrors and I won because I just had like stupid like swing with big tree and my opponent's like, shit, my only attack is Dread Screamer, and then I like don't get go again because I don't have a 6 and I banish some Blood Debt and now I'm screwed. And like that's the difference between me winning that round versus me losing that round. And like that all really adds up. And I think rather than getting like frustrated, like it's frustrating that your draft went bad, but like getting frustrated and focusing on how unlucky you are, it doesn't help you. You should really be thinking about like, what can I do when this happens? What are the, like, if things are going bad, what are my safety escapes? What are my ways to make the most out of that bad situation? Because often other people have bad decks too, and you don't need to have the best deck at the table. Sometimes all you need to do is not have the worst deck and try to get a 2-1 out of your deck. Maybe you can beat somebody else who has a really bad deck, sneak out a win against somebody where because like your deck's not good, but you have a game plan, you can catch them off guard, and that's enough for a 2-1. And like sometimes that's all you need. But if you're just like, oh man, my deck sucks, and you give up, you're not going to do well.
Sometimes you have to accept the fact in draft, like in constructed, like you can get high rolled. You can get high rolled in limited too. It's knowing when you're looking to 3-0 a draft pod and looking to 2-1 a draft pod, you pick different cards and you're looking for different things, and that only comes from experience. And honestly, like I think the main issue for limited is that most people only draft a set 10 times, and even 10 times is a lot for some people, or it feels like a lot. But honestly, it's only 30 games. Like in constructed, when you're playing constructed, do you ever play a constructed deck only 30 times? Most of the time, no, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
playing constructed, like you're gonna play like maybe like 50, 60 games, like including
Hmm.
playtesting, right? Like people expect the same kind of experience or like play skill with only like 5 6 drafts. And I'm like, no, like yeah, I know you like constructed better because you have like 40 50 more games in constructed, but you really need like 40 50 games of limited to have like the same kind of experience or the same kind of knowledge in that format. And it's just like I feel like most of the issue comes from people like not giving it a chance kind of thing. It's like people aren't willing to put that many games into limited. And obviously it comes down to like the problem of like cost and all the other logistic things, getting people together, so it gets harder and harder to like set up a draft pod and stuff like that. But I think of that excuse of like you don't like limited, it's mainly from you not having enough drafts under your belt. I think is where that's where I view it from, is like when someone
Hmm.
complains, I'm just assuming like, oh, like they've only drafted 10 times, or
Yeah.
in that range, like they
Mhm.
haven't given it like the 40 time drafts or something like that.
Yeah, because I think limited really is the most fun when you feel like you know when and how to draft each of the heroes, or if there's a hero that you're not drafting, it's because you've tried a bunch and you just go, "What, this hero doesn't click for me, or I don't think this hero is worth it, so I really don't want to draft it, but I can draft any of the other ones." When you're in that spot, you have so many more options than just like, I'm gonna force Teklo or I'm gonna force Fi. Oh, people cut me, I'm doomed. Like, like you're really not giving yourself like
Well,
very good options here. You're just praying. And it's not to say you can't force. Like sometimes, like I know Jay forced Prism at Nats and he had practiced that strategy a lot. But like even that practice of like, when it doesn't go my way, how do I make sure I have a better deck than all the other Prisms that are also forcing Prism? That's important too. You want to know that. You got to figure that out. And if you don't practice it, it's hard to learn.
yeah, it's like I was this really weird minority where I think I'm okay being prism number 6 in my pod, because
Hmm.
if I'm prism number 6, that means I just need to outplay the other prism players that are also technically prism number 6. And then now my goal is to find a way for my prism deck to beat one of these, like one of Chain, one of Bolton, or one of Levia. And I had a lot of fun picking very specific cards to beat those matchups, while having just enough power in my deck to beat the other Prism mirrors, because everyone's Prism deck is going to be awful. Now you just need to have like a corner case against these, like one of Chain, the one of Bolton, the one of Levia. And I really enjoyed doing that. So, but like that came after like what, like 35 drafts of Monarch or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. We played a lot of it. And I mean, like, another way to think about it is like heavy hitters, 6 heroes. Even if you draft 12 times, what is that, like 2 times per hero? Like, you probably don't actually draft each hero twice, but like, you get the point. Like, that's not a lot of experience on each hero. There might be heroes you've only played once. There might even be heroes you haven't played. Like, it's not as much as it sounds like. And I know, like, again, Jay mentioned, like, there's logistical problems. Not everybody has access to draft, but there are online discords, like the Runaways Discord, where you can get in draft queues. And there are ways to practice if you're really keen. And all the practice you can get is important. It doesn't. I think another common thing is like, it doesn't matter if you're drafting pros or you're drafting at your LGS with brand new players. Like there's always things to be learned. And I think if you are playing limited with a mind to get better and to prepare and to learn, it doesn't really matter what the setting is. You can learn plenty at armories. I do a lot of my prep at armories, honestly. Like it's a lot of like paying attention to how the cards play together, paying attention to how to build a good deck, and that's so much of it. And playing good players is important too. But you can do a lot of it on your own.
Let's move on. It's getting kind of long. Let's what is the word? Wrap it up. Let's wrap it up with one last question. What would you recommend for players prepping for a calling? Like, actually, did we talk about this?
We talked about a little bit of it, but I think that there's some unique points here. So we do have calling. We do have 3 callings, 1 in each region coming up for heavy hitters. If you're able to, watch coverage of the other callings. This won't work for Queenstown because you guys have the first calling and everyone's going to be looking to you. But go back, watch the coverage, see what people played. Even if you watch it 2 times speed, get an impression of what people are playing and what works and think about those decks a little bit. Number 2, find a way to look at other people's decks and talk about them. There's a few ways you can do this. You can just do this with friends. In my testing group, we just have like a Discord channel where we all post our deck and our thoughts on it, and we just talk about our draft decks all the time, and we look at our draft decks, and that's worth a lot. You can just do this with your friends. It doesn't, like, I know a lot of people go, I don't have a testing group. That's okay. Set up a Discord call with your 2 buddies and just all of you post your draft decks and talk about them. You'll learn a lot, I promise. If you want more access to this, you can also look at Discords. I believe that Runaways has this posted. You can also check out on the Bauble Discord through our Patreon. This is one of the things that Jay and I are going to be doing, and I'm hoping that a lot of our users will also be doing, is posting your draft decks, talking about them, getting feedback, thinking about them. This is a huge way to get better. You can see the decks that work well and the decks that don't work well, and understanding why they do or why they don't is valuable. Final one. This is sort of like a more hardcore one. I don't do this every set, but I know one of my teammates, Viet Pham, top 8 Worlds competitor last year, and also like calling top 8 competitor in Barcelona, which was limited, so like very, very good limited player. He likes to build 30 card draft decks, limit 2 copies of each rare and common, and then he just plays them against each other. He'll do this with a friend. They'll build a Teklo deck, a Max deck, a Dash deck, and they'll play them against each other almost like kind of like Blitz, and just try and find like what is like the best like quote unquote draft deck playing rares and commons against each other. And this kind of this helps you learn about like what cards you need to beat other heroes. This helps you learn about like what looks optimal. Are there cards that are good in Max, Dash, and Teklo, or are there cards that are only good in one of them? You can learn so much from this. And I think that honestly, like, if you're a player that doesn't have access to drafts in your area, it's just too hard to organize, do this. And even if you can't find a buddy to play them against, just building each of these draft decks and thinking about them, you will learn so much. I know that Jay and I we did something really similar. Like we built like a battle box with entails with like a pre-made Oldham, Briar, and Lexi deck, and kind of got them all to the same power level so people could try it out. But just like building those decks and having that experience of like playing them, tweaking them, you learn so much about the limited format.
Learn a lot. And honestly, the best part about that Tails thing is one of my friends still has it, and if he wants to play just like a board game, it's a board game now, and it costs like $5, maybe less. Like the cards are dirt cheap, and like if you have bulk, some people have bulk. You go to like a draft armory once, you collect all the bulk. You can put this together. It's kind of like close to free. Like it's great. It's a good board game.
Yeah, and it can be a way to introduce new players to the game too. Just like, hey, do you want to learn to play Flesh and Blood? I got some pre-con decks. You can try different ones out. If you're doing that, you do kind of want to like make sure that they're balanced against each other. So there's like a little bit of an extra layer, but I mean, that's fine. That's part of the fun.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, I think that's everything. So that's going to wrap us up. Hopefully that helps give you an idea of what to look for in heavy hitters. I'm excited to go into more like particulars about the set, talk about the heroes, talk about what we think they should be doing, talk about how we approach sealed, how we approach draft. But it's a little bit too early for that. We don't have enough of the cards yet. We need to see more of the set to really be able to do that. But hopefully this is kind of like a good piece of like evergreen content for you, where you can learn some skills that you can use in heavy hitters, and then you can use in all of the future sets to come. That's sort of the hope here. Anyways, Thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, please consider leaving us a like or a comment. If you're a YouTube listener, that really does help out the show. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so on social media. Jay is at Ueda J, and I am at Yukili Bender, or you can reach out to us via email on the bauble@gmail.com. You can also check out our Patreon, which will be in the show notes. It's patreon.com/onthebauble, and you can check out our Discord there. New set coming out is the perfect time to jump into the Discord, so consider doing that if you have a little bit of money that you can put into the game. But that's going to wrap us up. I hope that you all have a good night or a good morning or a good afternoon, wherever you are. And best of luck to you in your early heavy hitters events. We're excited to talk with you and hear from you about your experiences with the set as we're all kind of learning it together. Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Like a little bit of a sign off. Nothing too serious. The sixth hero got spoiled for heavy hitters. It's Victor Goldmain. I'm both super excited for this and super worried about this card. This card looks.
Yeah.
This card can be super toxic depending on what kind of cards that come out, or so unplayable depending on what cards come out. I cannot see this card being in like the middle of like a playable hero. It's like this card's gonna be broken or awful.
Yeah, it seems like he's like some fatigue deck that can his weapon grinding out cards out of the opponent's deck is like pretty powerful in fatigue. So very curious. I made the joke that in our local Discord I said, well, I know what hero Jay is going to be playing for the next however long. If the hero is very good, that's probably until he's gone or eats bans, or if the hero is not very good, it's probably until Jay is just like, hero bad, no good. But you know, like I imagine you'll be playing this hero for at least a little while to try and figure him out. Is that fair?
Oh yeah. Oh man, how do I make gold though? It's so hard to make gold.
You just need to win clashes, but we don't know how to clash. There's like block cards that clash, and that's all that we've seen. And it's sort of interesting because like the block cards are misses for clash, so there's like some tension there. So I'm curious to see like if we get some like big attacks with clash, it could be real good, especially if they block 3.
Well, yeah, the Golden Sun.
Yeah. Majestic. But
Majestic.
We'll see what else we get. There's currently like not that many ways to clash. I think we'll see some more.
Yeah. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I'm hoping this card is broken, so then I get to play some really awful fatigue style and fatigue people with Victor Goldmain. Or I'm gonna go back to Dash and just fatigue people playing Evos. So one or the other. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.